Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So thank you very much for joining me today. I think some of you maybe have come to our previous webinars. Today you have me as your host and speaker, and we're going to be talking about 5 surefire ways to improve remote workers' motivation. So this is something that, just to kind of introduce myself, it's something that I find really interesting and has been a big change in my career over the past few years. So for those who don't know me or haven't come to any of the webinars before, I'm the VP of Global for Attuned. I'm basically looking after the international business as Attuned expands. And I have some experience managing remote teams actually before COVID. Like I know people have kind of been thrown into experience in the last couple of years, but I was managing teams in San Francisco before the pandemic hit. Now, I'm not going to say that I was managing those teams particularly well, and I would say that there was a big learning curve to kind of adjusting to asynchronous communication. Now, I'm normally based in Japan. This is not Japan behind me. This is Oklahoma. If you can't tell, I can't can't see too much out the window, but I'm currently at my mother's house in Oklahoma on a work/holiday. One of the beauties of remote work, actually, and one of the things that I quite like about it. So, but when I was managing teams in San Francisco from Japan, the time difference and the asynchronous communication initially was a big blocker for me mentally. And I'll kind of explain some of the reasons why that might be. But if you look at my motivator profile, and we'll talk a little bit more about this later, social relationships is a high motivator for me. So I put over here on the left-hand side in the introduction, like I was a little bit of a work from home skeptic, and now a convert, as I think I kind of mentioned. But the reason why I was a skeptic was I'm happy when I'm in the office. I'm happy when there's things happening around me. I feel energized by that. And that's kind of my need for social relationships. That's my desire to be around other people that are also working, even if it's not the same thing. Like having that little bit of chaos for me is a motivating factor. And so I was definitely a skeptic. And when we had to kind of push everything to remote work for the pandemic, it wasn't until then that I really, I guess, not just accepted it, but kind of started to really actively push myself to understand the dynamics of work from home a lot better. And I think that was one of the things that, even though I'd had previous experience managing those teams, that was one of the things that really, really, I guess, skilled up my experience. So I'm actually going to start with a poll today. I thought this would be interesting. And so the question is, what is the most challenging aspect of managing or being a remote worker? And I'm going to go ahead and launch this poll, and then you can see there are 4 possible answers. The first answer is understanding what the team or individuals are doing. So this is kind of just, what are people working on? Another one is too many video meetings, which I think a lot of people have been talking about recently, feeling. Another one is difficulty communicating when not in the same room. So that kind of comes down to the asynchronous communication. And the last one is maintaining motivation, especially when we don't work with people side by side. That can be really difficult to understand how to keep that motivation very, very high. All right, we got lots of votes coming in. This is like, you guys can't see what I see, but this is like watching a horse race because it's like forward, out, back. Okay. We got about 18 votes so far. If there's anyone else who hasn't voted yet, please get that in. There's quite a few people, I think, that haven't. I'm going to end this, say 3, 2, 1. Okay, here we go. And so let me actually share the results, and they are interesting. So number 1 was actually just understanding what the team or individuals are doing, followed by too many video meetings. Hey, I can totally relate to that. Maintaining motivation was another one. And then finally, like difficulty communicating about the same room. That's kind of interesting, actually. I thought that one might be a little bit higher. So, well, I'm going to address all 4 of those, plus a kind of bonus as well. So let's start with actually the the one that most people picked, which is understanding what other people are doing. And really the key to this is a few things. So the way I refer to this is you have to make trust your default setting. And we're not used to that, because what we're actually used to is being able to see what people are doing, being able to understand how people are working, what they're working on, and kind of there's lots of communication, in hallways, office coolers, all around the office. You have all this communication, and you can see, and with your teams working in the office, just makes it easier to like lean over and ask a question, and so you can kind of get instant feedback. And when you're working remote, that's not possible, right? And there's delays, whether it's, even if you're communicating by things like Slack, there can be delays. So to kind of fix those problems, there's a few different things you can do, right? Now, first of all, the one that I like to talk about, and the one that I think makes the biggest difference in your day-to-day life, is setting clear expectations. So what I mean by that is, if you're having, I'm a big believer in weekly one-on-ones. For some times, I think it's okay to do, for example, every other week. But if you're struggling with kind of understanding what someone's working on, having some sort of system where you're catching up every week, or there's a reporting system that's done on a regular basis, will help you to understand what that person's working on. It'll help you to have increased accountability, to set goals, targets, and objectives. So in my one-on-ones, we do those weekly. I have a system in which I'm looking at, the first thing I look at is what that person's targets and objectives were from the previous week, how they performed on those things, if there were any blockers and challenges that made it difficult, or they couldn't get there with what they were aiming for. And then I dig into those things, right? So I understand what were those blockers, what were those challenges, and then we're going to agree on the next set of goals for the coming week. In doing this, I can have that, anywhere from 30 to 45-minute one-on-one once a week. And I typically do that on a Monday. A Friday is okay as well if you want to check in on the week and then set it for the next week. I like to do it on a Monday so that everything's fresh in their minds. But when you do that, then you set those goals, and then you can let go, right? And you can kind of be confident that you know what they're supposed to be working on, that they have accountability for that, and that they're going to come back to you and report on that. Or, if they have a problem like midweek, they need to let you know what's happening. And if their goals need to change, then what's the change, right? Now, if you have this kind of action and you set this kind of expectations in a one-on-one, you'll find it's much easier for you to get on with your own work, to focus on what you need to do, and to have the confidence that they have a very clear plan that they are following. Now, there's still a few ways that can go wrong. If they're used to if they're like kind of constantly seeking you out for affirmation on what they're doing, you need to kind of set some parameters like, okay, this is your job, this is your role, this is what I need you to accomplish, and you set them going on that. Another way to help with this is to use collaboration tools. So, there's a lot that you can choose from. Some of them, of course, you have to pay for, but you can use things like Google Documents. So the simplest form of a one-on-one sheet is just, a Google document with the date, who's in that Google document, and then tracking with notes, right? Like, okay, this is what we discussed. This is what was decided. Here's the goals for this week. And just having that simple shared document where both of you can add topics, both of you can add notes is very helpful. You can also do that, again, for free, and things like Trello. Evernote has free tiers. And so there's lots of different options that you have for collaboration, but it's important that you have something that is shared where people can kind of write things in for discussion points or for reporting. And that's going to help you keep track. It's also important to empathize. So life has changed in terms of like our work from home. Like, we're all kind of dealing with things that we didn't have to before. And sometimes, whether that's like sick kids or sick parents, or different situations that sick dogs and cats, like I've had that one come up. yeah, we have to understand that, the kind of roles, the typical roles have changed since, we've all started working remotely, and that's kind of impacted everyone within the workspace and within the work life. And so how we kind of empathize with that and how we show that empathy is very important. The next one is be flexible. So, some companies still want to have, they work from home, but they still have that kind of 9 to 5 work style. Personally, I find that's very difficult to maintain with remote work, particularly. And I'll give you a very clear example of why. As I mentioned, I'm in Oklahoma at the moment. My son, who lives in Japan, flew in a couple of days ago. It was his first time traveling alone by himself all the way from Japan to Oklahoma. He had to do 2 transfers, one in LA, which is just a nightmare of an airport, and another one in Vegas. Well, his flight in LA got, uh, wasn't canceled, but it was like delayed for like 2 hours. He didn't get to Vegas on time. They booked him on a different flight. He barely got to Vegas. Then he had 10 minutes to run all the way across 2 concourses to get to his flight to Oklahoma City. He made it just barely. Like, I was one stressed out dad during that period. I didn't get any work done. I did like just 3 hours where I was just like watching the phone, waiting for him to call me to give me the next update, and checking the flights online to see if he was, gonna make it. And I was on the phone with the airline, and like, would that have happened if I was in the office in Japan? Like, yeah, I guess so. And we would have been understanding, like my boss would have understood it, and people in the office would have seen me struggling with that. Well, working from home, we have those same kind of problems, but they're not as visible. And so we have to understand that we won't always see everything that people are dealing with, but it's important that we're flexible and we give people that room to be able to manage those kinds of problems that are like urgent and important for their life. So my example may be a little bit extreme, but I think we all have those kinds of situations that come up where we have to deal with it, whether we're at home or in the office. And then the last one here is give clear and timely feedback. So again, when we're in the office, we have the ability to just lean across the desk and say like, hey, I saw that you did this. Actually, a better way to do it would be this, right? So you can give that kind of quick, instant feedback. Now, working remote, it's harder to do that. And you also have different channels that you're communicating through. You have to really be careful of what channels you're communicating in. So if somebody slacks me feedback, probably like that, it better be really, really minor, right? Like if they want to give me important feedback, I want them to call me or, set up a time to talk to me and sort of have that communication so that I can ask questions and find out more information during that time. So how you deliver the feedback is important, but still when we're working remote, it's important that we are still giving clear and timely feedback. And so I wouldn't always wait. Sometimes it's okay to wait for the next one-on-one, but if it's something where normally you would correct that action or you would explain the feedback immediately, you need to be able to do that. And so the quickest way is to have a general understanding of what how people communicate, which I'm actually going to get to, and to be able to utilize those to kind of set up a quick call or just quickly call and talk. So those are the things we do want to do. Things to avoid are, I guess, like I heard a lot of, like in the early days of the pandemic, man, there was so many horror stories, like really like companies that were forcing, employees to have cameras on all day. Companies that were asking their employees to report on bathroom breaks, like, on their team channels and things like, I'm going to be away for 15 minutes. I'm going to lunch now. I will be back in 30 minutes. Like that kind of stuff, it does not build trust. All of these things in the yes category are designed to build trust and to create that shared comfort that what you're working on is understood and agreed upon. And really, I will come back to that first one, like doing a great one-on-one, having clear collaboration tools is really the foundation of being able to understand what not just you as the manager, but what the employee, the other way around, what the employees are doing for your perspective as the manager, but it goes both ways, right? It's a two-way street. The employees want to know what you're doing as the manager as well. And so when you have that kind of level of communication, those things get a lot easier. I forgot to mention at the beginning, but there will be some time for Q&A at the end. So if you do have any questions, you can actually type them in the Q&A section, and I will address those questions at the end. Or we can do, it's not going to be like a live Q&A, but if you have questions at the end, you can just type them in and I will answer as many as we have time for. So sorry, I didn't explain that, but I'll just briefly mention that before we move on. Okay, number 2 is about video meetings. So this was number 2 on the poll. So Zoom fatigue is totally real. It's totally real, and it's awful. I think, like in the early days, when I was working from home like every day, and it was kind of really difficult. And I usually have a 1.5 hour commute to the office, and so before work from home, I was like commuting in an hour and a half on super busy, crazy trains early in the morning, and then going home kind of late. And, of course, I'd be tired. Well, when I started working from home, I realized like I am equally tired. Like I am still tired. Like, why am I so tired? And I did some research, and one of the interesting things that I learned about is there's this idea that Zoom meetings are actually more exhausting, and I'll kind of explain this. And what it comes down to is Beribion's 7-38-55 communication model. And what this is saying is that only 7% of our communication is from spoken words. 38% is the voice and tone that we use, and 55% is actually from body language. And so you can kind of dispute this, and it has been disputed. There's lots of different studies that suggest different things. But what is indisputable and is kind of proven is that body language is a big part of our communication. Now, what happens when you're on Zoom? Of course, you can see my facial expressions. You can hear my tone of voice, but it's not going to be as clear and as good. There's a lot of problems with Wi-Fi, and we cut out, we get frustrated, and those kinds of things. But the reality is there's only so long that you can stare at a screen in this kind of 2-dimensional format and keep your focus and attention locked on another person, right? And so I'm right there with you. Like I'm sure everyone in this, in this webinar has kind of experienced where you're in a meeting with, it could be a big meeting, could be like 4 or 5 people, and somebody is like, clearly not paying attention. They're doing something different. Their attention's on something else. They're typing. You can kind of see it, and it's probably frustrating, right? Well, there's often like a psychological reason for this, is that we are so tired of like looking at and trying to focus because we're not getting all the visual stimuli that we're used to. We're not kind of being able to read somebody's body language. And so what our brain is doing is trying to like hyper focus on, the words that people are saying, which is actually like a pretty small part of overall communication. And some of you are probably struggling with this right now. And like, I totally understand, like it's hard to pay attention to something online for that long, right? That's why, probably TikTok is like 30-second clips. Like that's what people can kind of pay attention to if you're on a screen, right? And so there's a lot of difficulties that come with these kind of like having a lot of video meetings or really long video meetings. Now, recent studies, and this is something that's being studied a lot these days, recent studies have shown that productivity is higher when cameras are off, right? So when you're not forced to have that hyper focus, when you're able to, turn off that part of your brain that's trying to pick up the 55%, you're actually going to pick up more, right? So you're actually going to get more information in certain situations, right? And so what I urge people to do is decide, does this meeting need to have video to be successful? Do you need to have video in this situation to be able to have the meeting or communicate what you need to communicate? And what I personally do is for one-on-ones, I want to have video on because I think that's one-to-one communication. I think that kind of, seeing somebody's body language and showing them that they have my full attention as well, I think that's very important. So when I'm in a one-on-one, I don't want to be distracted. I want to be listening. I want to kind of make sure I catch all the information, because if we go back to problem number one, I want to feel comfortable about my week. So I want to do a really good one-on-one and be confident in what they're working on. So one-on-ones, I'll put video on. For big meetings, I like it to be optional, right? If people are happy to turn their videos on, that's fine. If they want to turn videos off, no problem. As long as they're participating and they're communicating when they need to be communicating, that's 100% fine. You can also do video off until somebody's speaking and then they turn video on. That's another way to do it. And then I like to have some meetings that are just video off. Like, there's a couple of meetings that I do that I just ban video, like no video, keep it off. And that way, like, nobody feels pressured that they have to turn video on. Right, so this one actually was one of the things that it didn't come out high in the poll, but I want to talk about it anyway, because I do think it's important. I think it's especially important for asynchronous communication. And if you are struggling with problem number one, which was understanding what people are doing, I think having these clear communication preferences will help. Now, what I mean by this is having an understanding of how people work and how they will most efficiently process what you are telling them and get back to you. And so different people are different. And for example, mine are, if you want a quick response from me, you can Slack me. So I'm on Slack most of the time. I have my phone on Do Not Disturb, of course, late at night, and I won't get things done. But the other times, if I see a Slack, I'm going to check it, and generally I'll respond. So for anybody that works with me, they're able to Slack me for those kind of quick questions. However, if you want a thoughtful response, or what you're going to send me is very long, do not use Slack, because once Slack, if I get some other Slacks, it's gone. It's just over, right? On the other hand, I'm really good with my email box. My inbox is, if not inbox 0, it doesn't have a scroll bar. Like, I get really stressed out if I see a scroll bar. I get stressed out when I see other people's emails inbox and they have a scroll bar. Like, that freaks me out, because the way that I use email is not as necessarily a to-do list, but I want to read, action, delete. Like, that's my philosophy when it comes to email. So if I read it, I need to be able to take an action immediately, and then I remove it so that it's no longer there. So for people that want a thoughtful response from me, if it's something that I need to think about, the way that I'm going to handle that is I'm going to get that email, I'm going to process it into some other form of time management function that I have. And that could be like get things done methodology. You might have your own that you use, but something where you're going to process it. And then that way you have time to think about it, to write a thoughtful response, or just if it's a long email, to read it. And then if it's urgent, call me, just call me. Like, even if it's a team, like it's a US-based team, if you've got a problem, if something's on fire, I would much rather you call me than Slack and like wait for me to reply, like passively. Like, no, if it's actually urgent, call me. Now, if somebody calls me and it's midnight in Japan, I'm going to be like, okay, is this urgent? And it better be. And if it's not, I'm going to educate them like, hey, this isn't urgent. I could have dealt with this tomorrow. But if it's really urgent, I want that call. So again, because people have different working styles, for some people, again, email may be where things go to die. Like, so you don't email them difficult things. Like, they have a different way of handling it. Maybe it's that collaboration document, for example. If you put it on there, they're going to work that better that way. Maybe it is Slack. So it's kind of important to have this conversation. Actually, at Attuned, what we do is we have a shared document where when any new person joins, they actually write in their preferred communication methods. So we have like a whole list of every single person, and any new person can go in there, they add theirs, you can see what other people's preferences are, and that way you can kind of be mindful of the best way to reach them. All right, number 4, something very near and dear to my heart is intrinsic motivation, right? This is what Attuned does. And I think, I've seen a lot more cases of this coming up. the longer we get into remote work, the more we continue to hire and onboard new people, the bigger this problem is going to get. Because when you are working and sitting right next to someone, you are learning about their motivators, whether you know it or not, right? You're getting to know them as a person. You're starting to understand their, of course, personality and behaviors. But underneath that, you're starting to learn about what their motivators are. And when you're working remote, you have less opportunity and less time to do that, which necessitates the need for more open discussions. So why intrinsic motivation? Well, very simply, it's because that's what gets you out of bed in the morning, right? This is your values. This is the underlying value structure that drives personality and behavior. And that's, more than anything else, that's what gets people out of bed and makes them excited to do their job, right? This is how people take enjoyment. And if you want a really interesting overview of this, you can watch Dan Pink's TED Talk. We actually just did an interview with Dan Pink, which was, if you're on our newsletter, you would have gotten that. I think we posted it on LinkedIn if you want to check that out. But go check out Dan Pink's TED Talk about extrinsic versus intrinsic motivators. It's very insightful. The key finding is that extrinsic motivators don't work. Like financial rewards, incentives, like the traditional carrot and stick model does not work. It's fundamentally flawed when it comes to business. What has been absolutely proven to work is intrinsic motivation. And so we are really like one of the very, very few companies out there that measure this and understand it and can help you understand it. So these are the 11 motivators that we look at. And there's lots of room for discussion. I'm not going to discuss all of them, but I want to discuss a couple of them that tend to trip people up a little bit, right? So one here is financial needs. So, I did a kind of one-on-one coaching session with somebody a couple of months ago, and she did her assessment and she came back and she was like, Chad, I can't have financial needs as number one. I can't. I'm just shocked. I'm appalled. And I was like, okay, why? And what it came down to is she's never changed jobs for money. She doesn't view herself as money motivated. She doesn't spend a lot of time thinking about money. And I was like, okay, well, what does it represent to you? Like, why do you work? And her answer was very interesting. So she was living abroad and she needed to go back and visit, her family like a couple times a year. And, because of the country that she was living in was a bit expensive, like to live in, a safe and good neighborhood was, it's higher cost of living there. And so what it meant to her was that stability and comfort where she didn't have to worry about things. So it was never more. It was, do I have enough to have the most basic lifestyle that I need to have? And so financial needs isn't always about more. And for some people it can be, and that's fine. Like, that's okay. There's a lot of jobs where that is an important factor in what you do, right? But for a lot of people, it's just having that stability and comfort. Another one, which is kind of similar, is status. So a lot of people see status and they think job title, they think corner office, they think like a hierarchical type of like business structure. And that's not what it is at all. It can be like, there's room for that. And if you work at a traditional financial services institution, for example, it could be that, right? That could be part of the natural hierarchy of the organization. But status easily translates into respect. So that is how people view the work that you do, how you view the company that you work for and the company's mission, and the importance that you place on that, right? So the respect at all of those levels, so how people respect you and how you respect what you do and what the company does that you work for. So these are a couple that tend to kind of cause some confusion and sometimes like kind of upset people a little bit, right? Now, it's important to know that when we talk about intrinsic motivators, there is no good and bad, right? These are all, in our eyes, 100% equal. And we're not talking about skill level either. So for example, somebody that has low social relationships, it does not mean that they're unsociable. It does not mean that they don't want to spend time with their coworkers. What it does mean is that they are not looking for the work environment to provide that for them. So in this particular example, where the person's high on autonomy and low on social relationships, they are probably very comfortable working in a remote environment. They are probably like enjoying it, right? And they may not be like dying to get back to the office. They may be kind of, "Like, I'm good, like thanks, we can kind of do this for as long as we need to." And for some of those people as well, they're going to feel pressured and maybe demotivated when they're pushed to go back to the office, right? Not for all, but again, for some, right? So it's important to realize that we're not measuring skill. And again, I said we're not measuring personality, although these things can reflect on personality. And a good example is me, like, again, competition is part of my personality. I do a lot of competitive things. You know, you'll kind of, I'm outwardly very competitive. I tend to identify competition with winning. A lot of people identify competition with achievement, like personal achievement and challenge. So they're not competing with other people. They're more competing with themselves. And that's, we see a lot of people who you would never know that they're competitive, but that rate's pretty high for them, right? So go back to my example, and I was a work from home skeptic. And actually, this is part of the reason why. So my high social relationships and relatively low need for autonomy, when I started, like when we were talking about moving the whole business remote, I had a moment of panic. And the reason I had a moment of panic is because in my mind, I need to be around people to feel motivated, right? That's part of my, desire to work for a company and to like, okay, I need that excitement, like I said earlier. And so I was significantly worried that not having that was going to be a negative for most people. Well, it wasn't, because if you look at our company Attuned, actually social relationships is pretty low in the group, right? As like an indicator, it's pretty low for most people. And it's actually one of the bigger gaps that I have with my team, where pretty much everyone has low social relationships except for me. And so as a manager, I'm kind of stuck on the idea that like, okay, we got to get together. I got to see these people. I'm not going to feel comfortable unless I kind of know, like how they're doing and stuff like that. They're fine. Like they're okay. Like they don't need that. But the cool thing about it is they all know, because they know I have high social relationships. Every single person has offered to like, hey, let's meet up for lunch. Let's all get together in the office at least, once a month, where we're all together and kind of doing something like, and that's really cool. And that's because we're aware of that, we've been able to have that conversation. And that's been very motivational for me. But I've also found that it's my responsibility to, just because my team isn't in the office, there's still activity in the office. There's still other people there. I can go and I can talk to people and I can kind of fulfill that need myself as well. So this is how Attuned is helping companies that are working remote build that level of knowledge and communication so that you can have those very open and transparent conversations on an individual level, but also on a team level, so that you can make sure that everyone is feeling good, that we understand what those motivators are, and that we can kind of play to those motivators as much as possible. So this is a big number, 7.5 quadrillion. That's a lot of zeros, but it's a quadrillion. Let me put that into other terms. So if we put that into seconds, it's 237.5 million years. It's a long time. If we put it into kilometers, and sorry, I think most of our audience today is in the US, but if I put it into kilometers, it's one more like equation for miles, but it's 792 light years, still a long way. And a little bit sadly, I don't know, I want this to be the biggest number, but if you put it into dollars, it's 37,000 times Jeff Bezos's net worth. Still a big number, but yeah, it's kind of frightening to think that there's more, I guess, seconds in this number than dollars in Jeff Bezos's net worth. What this number signifies is the number of total combinations of motivators within Attuned. And so whether we like it or not, we are all beautiful motivational snowflakes, and we all have a different profile that will be super motivational for us. And so as managers, if we want to get the most out of our teams, if we want to get the most out of ourselves as well, it's important that we know these and understand these. And finally, I'd said there would be one kind of bonus, and this is accept that the situation has changed. It's not going back. right? It may, I mean, for some businesses, I think they're kind of pushing for that, but for most people, there is some balance that they want. And as I said, I'm a work from home convert. I don't work from home every day because again, I have that need to kind of be around people, but 2 or 3 times a week, there's been a lot of good things that have come from my life, like, me working from Oklahoma, having dinner with my family, almost every day. Like those things are really fantastic. And I wouldn't change that. And a lot of people are feeling that way. And so if your company has the ability to do this and you've accepted it, you have to kind of also accept that the style of work that you had before and the style of communication that you had before is going to be different going forward. And Matthew McConaughey really exceptionally shows this. I think we've all kind of felt this way throughout the last few years, but we have to remember that remote work is still a learning process for most managers and employees. Are we going to get it right all the time? No. Like I said, when I was first started managing remote teams in San Francisco, I made a lot of mistakes. I didn't know what I was doing. I was trying to figure it out as I went, and I messed up a lot. But through those mistakes, I learned a lot. When kind of the whole business went remote in March of 2020, I was much better prepared from those lessons. And so for all of you that are still struggling with this, it's okay. Like, try some things, talk to your team, try to get their buy-in on what you want to do, and then you could try to implement those ideas. And also, you have to remember it's not going to work equally well for everyone. As I mentioned, we all have those kind of unique motivators, but also we have unique circumstances. And whether that means in your company you have some staff that can work from home and some staff that are not able to because their job doesn't allow it. That's something that it has to be navigated, and it has to be navigated very carefully. To be honest, I don't envy those people that have to make those decisions, like at companies like Amazon, where you have some part of the workforce that working from home is just not an option, right? It's difficult to navigate that, but what's important is that as a business, you make some decisions, clear lines of delineation, and that you communicate those things as fairly and equitably as possible. But even within that, it's not going to work equally well for everyone. I hope that was helpful. I covered quite a lot of information. Now, if people have questions afterwards, or you think of something later, please let us know. If you're interested in getting your own assessment, we will be reaching out to people after this webinar. But if you're interested in getting your own motivational assessment, please let us know. We're happy to kind of send a link to you so that you can take it and get those results for yourself. So one of the questions that we have in the chat is, it's hard to keep track of everyone's preferences. How do you communicate preferences effectively to colleagues, and how do you keep track of others' preferences? So I kind of addressed this. I think it was an accident. Thank you very much for the question. I think the easiest way is a shared document. So as I mentioned at Attuned, we have a shared document that all new employees, one of the checklist items that they have during onboarding is to actually add that information. And we also have a bit of fun with it. It's not just communication preferences. It's kind of things like, for example, like hobbies and things like that. So it's kind of like a getting to know each other document. But it also kind of functions to let people know what those communication preferences are. Also, so I will say that it doesn't, look, the reality is you can't check that document every single time you're going to message someone, right? And so sometimes, like, we have to kind of default to a specific type. But I try to ask people, if I'm in a meeting and somebody says like, oh, can you send that to me, or let's follow up. I usually try to ask them like, okay, what's the best way? Do you want to like set up a call? Should I send that by email? Is Slack the best way? So I think like in the moment, if you can ask, that will help to kind of keep things efficient and moving forward. All right, well, there wasn't any other questions in the Q&A. So I hope that that's because I answered everything, or it was quite clear. Like I said, if you're shy and you do have a question, or there's something that you think about later, please feel free to contact me. I'm really happy to have discussions about this. It's something that it's a topic that I'm very interested in. I don't feel that I've learned everything there is to know about remote work, and it's still a learning process for me as well. But I'm really happy to speak to anyone and talk to you or kind of give advice where I can. So thank you very much for joining us today. I really appreciate you taking the time. I hope everyone has a great rest of the day on Thursday, an easy Friday, and a lovely weekend. So thank you very much for joining us. We'll talk to you soon.